a pleasure for me to introduce you to Amy Shuen, who's one of the world's best known, I could say, experts on Web 2.0. It's also a pleasure for me because here at YESE we're currently having a big research project which is on Web 2.0 and the use of social media specifically for innovation, while Amy's research is more targeted towards the use of Web 2.0 in organizations, and she recently published a, I think, very exciting book on Web 2.0 called A Strategy Guide, where we can actually see how companies use Web 2.0 tools to boost efficiency and to change their approaches to business problems on a daily basis. Amy Shuen is a very international recognized authority in the Silicon Valley area. Amy, welcome here at YESE. It's a great pleasure for us to have you here, since we all know that Web 2.0 is currently a very hot topic, since many people are asking if Web 2.0 actually may help us to get out of the crisis, or at least to boost efficiency, which is also something that during crisis times people want to do a lot. Other people may know Amy from the 90s. In the 90s, when all these things started, I was a PhD student, and I was one of those that read probably one of your most influential papers on dynamic capabilities. And how did you go from dynamic capabilities to what's going on today, Web 2.0?
Dynamic capabilities, I think, was a paper that resonated with a lot of people in the strategy field because it made two, I think, important points that everyone knew, but perhaps needed to be stated more clearly. The first one is that competitive advantage is about organizational capabilities, not just industry structure, which was the prevailing view among strategy researchers and MBAs at that time. And the second thing I think we did was say that capabilities are not in of itself enough to be competitive in a turbulent or difficult or challenging or crisis environment. In fact, you really need to have dynamic capabilities, this ability to orchestrate not only your own capabilities, but maybe the capabilities of others in combination to be able to meet the changing demands of a very fickle and volatile kind of world. And those two things put together, I think, resonated with a lot of the people in the strategy field as a way to think about competitive advantage.
That's actually probably the seeding point to actually bridge it on to Web 2.0, because what we see in Web 2.0 is also about orchestrating and putting very many little tiny pieces together, right?
Exactly. And I think you pointed out the two most important aspects that connect it to Web 2.0. The first one is this idea of innovation as not only creative destruction and also new imaginative things, but also combinations of existing competences and capabilities and companies. So that first is very important. The second thing, besides that orchestration, is doing it in real time. Doing it in a way and at a time that meets the demands of the situation. In the past, it might have been very difficult to orchestrate and to pull things together. And this is where, of course, Web 2.0 and our new technologies come into place, where you can, in some cases, more easily orchestrate, coordinate using technologies. You can more quickly interact. You can more quickly experiment. And, in fact, some of these competences or skills can even be embedded into some ways into software or into hardware, into a digital good or experience, product or service, that then can be transferred and distributed much more quickly and easily and globally.
I think it's very exciting actually to see how you want to provide the different milestones that companies have to follow in order to set up a Web 2.0 strategy. Could you just briefly, for our audience, highlight a bit what it would be for you the essential terms of the Web 2.0 strategy guide that you develop in length in your book?
The first one was certainly, at least in some of my chapters, I talk about Amazon and how Amazon was able to proliferate e-commerce by essentially creating many, many partners through its use of storefronts and its electronic storefronts that were available to anyone who wanted to become an affiliate. Another example might be IBM, that actually was able to very quickly open up the system of Linux, find developers, and they estimate maybe 15 million developers are going to appear in India and China on Linux, and make all of those new applications and those new development kinds of software available across the world. So in other words, taking something that might in the past have been a local capability or a local skill and make it available elsewhere. So I think those might be two examples that, from my book, that give some idea of some of the best practices that companies are using in getting from a more Web 1 or traditional way of looking at strategy to competing in a more global and interconnected world.
And another of the key concepts in your book has to do with communities, right? So could you develop a bit more so that people understand how companies that want to go Web 2.0 actually could think about incorporating the notion of communities and collaboration and all this sort of enhanced interactivity, as you mentioned in the book?
Even before I go through that, I should mention that part of these communities is a huge social kind of transformation that has taken place. In my book, I point out that, in my mind at least, Web 1, or the first generation of the web, started at around 1995, and it really became visible to most people because of Netscape going public in 1995. And so 10 years passed when the web was mostly a kind of a place where you went online and you downloaded information. You downloaded material that people had put, or companies had put on websites. And there weren't really that many things on the web except for ones that had been put there by companies, for example. Then suddenly, I guess in 2005, there was a big change. There was what we call a crossover point, because actually there was more uploading. So more people were uploading data to the web than were downloading. And as a result, you had a very different situation on the web. You had people who were now givers, who were active contributors, who were publishers, who were putting their photos, their videos, all their content on the web for others to benefit from, and not just taking away from the web. And so that kind of social transformation took place in the 2005 timeframe, and that's the date at which I say the start of Web 2.0 really was. This crossover point when it became an interactive kind of social transformation of the web as a place where you shared and you gave and you contributed, and that improved the network experience and what you could do online for everybody.
If that is true, and if that is part of the guide to strategy, to a Web 2.0 enabled strategy, that's a pretty big jump in terms of the mindset of organizations, right?
Absolutely. And I think that that's why this is not only a social transformation, but clearly a very important business and industry transformation that's occurring. And just for that reason, the very relationship and the way in which the businesses need to listen in some ways to what their customers and what their audience and what their partners are saying has changed dramatically as a result of this.
So managers have to not only to learn to receive from the customers, right, rather than just pushing them the products or services that they would think, we think, right, in organizations that are good, but we have to start receiving suggestions and receiving ideas, but also we have to start to give away more information and to give away control, because we are going to get into an enhanced conversation not only with the outside market and internally.
Right, absolutely. And that dynamic is happening already. And I think that it's particularly certain companies are seeing that the enterprise of the future or the 21st century may look very much like a Web 2.0 community rather than our more traditional view of a hierarchical company with a real kind of barrier or distance between the company internal and its partners, its stakeholders, and its customers.
A previous speaker that we had some time ago here at Yes actually talked about a changing paradigm from managers that engineers to managers that cultivate, which I think is also a nice way of talking about that. But when you then, since you've done extensive research, can you share with us some examples of what would be some of the most innovative business models in Web 2.0 that you have seen and that you can share and tell the people about?
Right. Well, I had a set that I used to explain the different key concepts of Web 2.0 strategy in my book. And what I had done there was in chapter 1, I had started by talking about Flickr, the photo sharing company that was later acquired by Google. And the way in which I explained Flickr was as an example of collective user value. In other words, a place where not only did people share photos, but also found a way to contribute back to the community of photo sharers in some significant way, and contribute back in a way that made sense for their particular needs and interests. So, for example, professional photographers at Flickr can actually get more space and more features because they pay a monthly subscription fee. So that's a use of a revenue model that we call freemium, free plus premium. We have this example in the same company of Flickr that they saw that others wanted to contribute in other ways rather than money. So certain people just tag or footnote different kinds of photos to make it easier for others to search for it. Still, other groups are more active because they put together groups or events together. And then an amateur photographer might actually be helping Flickr stay in business by having their Flickr photographs being uploaded to the site for Target, so that it could get photo development. But each time something goes through that system, a small transaction fee is paid to Flickr by the sponsor Target. So in this particular case, it just showed that, in chapter 1 at least, that it just showed that there were multiple streams of revenue that a company could have, being a Web 2.0 company. Plus, it showed that collective user value could be captured and brought back, so that could be brought back to the benefit of the entire community. And so it starts a whole a theme that I continue in other chapters about how Web 2.0 is all about network effects of different kinds, and how companies can capture the value of those network effects or monetize them, rather than always just allowing them to become either externalities or public goods.
Because precisely these issues is that you also translate them to more traditional business propositions, no? Like for example, so that even companies like the example that you have on the electricity meters, right, get into Web 2.0 mood. And that's something I found very interesting.
You've touched on something that I think is always the difficulty when you're working in something like Web 2.0. Even though my book has been out only for a year, I think that the examples I use provide a fundamental look at each of the practices that underlie Web 2.0. But of course, in that short amount of time, there are even more good examples and more interesting ones that everybody has become aware of. And I think some of the ones that we talked about earlier, the Obama campaign, for example, and the use of the iPhone in his campaign was quite innovative, and one that gives lots of good ideas on how Web 2.0 and the mobile world are going to come together. We certainly looked at, as you mentioned, some of the interesting things that Google and GE and the smart grid are doing, and some of the interesting infrastructure projects that are going to happen as a result of smart health are certainly Web 2.0 driven kinds of initiatives. And then I guess I always bring up in my talks, you know, the more examples that any parent with a kid that's between 6 and 8 years old must know that Webkinz, the stuffed toy company that has an online component, is a great example of how traditional companies, even companies like stuffed toy companies, can participate in the digital economy in quite a significant way.
Managers that today are facing huge budget pressures, what could you give them some recommendation in terms of what to do Web 2.0 wise to affront those pressures and to include Web 2.0 to solve some of their current crisis oriented problems or crisis detected problems that they're having?
One of the first things to be thinking about during the crisis is their cash flow, and to do a cash flow curve for all of their projects. And if they were to do that, they would see a graph that looks very much like this. This is a graph that compares doing a Web 2 oriented project with a Web 1 and a more traditional project. And as you can see, the return on investment for the cash flow for a Web 2 kind of project tends to be much better, and in fact can be almost cash positive almost from the beginning. You might wonder how or why, and it's because it allows for early experimentation to try out ideas at a very low risk and low capital cost, and therefore to figure out very quickly, to kind of almost test market as you go, what kinds of things are going to make sense and what is actually going to work. So in each case, I would ask managers that are wondering how can they innovate in times of cash pressure and budget pressure to think about, is there a number of small Web 2.0 kinds of projects or initiatives I could get started and test today, get feedback from at a very low cost outlay, because indeed you have many ways to have software as a service and also to have cloud computing where you only pay for the computing power that you use, to put things on the web, to try out a new approach either for marketing or social marketing, or to try and find a better way to reach partners or to engage partners and communities. And to do that project early on, find out if it works, and go from there. So I think that one of the first things a manager facing budget pressures that still wants to innovate is to look at some Web 2 initiatives.
You actually have an example, I believe, from the election, right? From the American election, when Barack Obama, during the campaign, actually started using Web 2.0 things.
I think that's a really good example because you can use this very same curve and show that in some sense the fact that the iPhone application, the download that was provided for Barack Obama's campaign actually was much faster in generating not only downloads so that people could start using the application quickly by getting it off the web, but also that the number of phone calls that it generated in 5 days' time was something like 500,000. So indeed, if you can think of a marketing campaign where you could get 500,000 new users in a very short amount of time and have them engaged and actually referring your product or your service to others that they know in their social network, then you have a very successful campaign and social media initiative.
You get a high return, right? Taking advantage of network externalities.
So a high return for very little investment, and all of this using the ease of distribution of software on the web and how quickly that can be distributed, almost as a viral distribution, using Facebook or, in this case, the iPhone store, and how quickly that application can grow and be used by others. So it is possible with using Web 2.0 technologies to be able to do more with less. And in some cases, to be able to take existing networks of customers, of partners, of stakeholders, and to do things faster, multiply the leverage of those networks more effectively, and do so faster. So that's really kind of the idea behind Web 2.0. It's this amplifier or multiplier, in some ways, of your current resources and current capabilities and relationships. And so many, many more companies should be thinking about not only how they can increase their reach and their marketing through Web 2.0, but how they can innovate using their existing customer bases and partnerships to be able to multiply the value of those networks using Web 2.0.
So rather than go with what we used to see in the past about outsourcing things, it's about insourcing your dynamic capabilities, right? So including them into your current capability set by just amplifying the thing to the outside.
Exactly. That's right. So it's in some ways, in the past, we've only been able to do business as value added in some sense. And now, with Web 2.0 technologies and this whole digital channel and whole network effect, we really have to start thinking exponentially and think about what are all the things that we can multiply and get value from, rather than just add value.
I see quite optimistic are you in terms of how Web 2.0 can actually help us. You actually see exponential multiplying effects, which I think that many of our managers need today to actually cope with crisis. Thank you again for talking with us about Web 2.0 and how we can actually use Web 2.0 to improve our current businesses in these pretty tough times.